Welcome to today's episode of the Sunday Spark, where we talk to interesting people, interesting objectivists, and sort of either what they've done with their life or how they used objectivism to succeed. And generally, I think every objectivist has some interesting perspective, especially in their field, since technically there's like very little objectivists in the world, so we don't get that much experience in specific fields, and so it's always interesting to talk to specific people. And today we of course have James Valliant, and I'm sure everybody has already seen him on our other shows. And today we'll talk to him about maybe the two posters he has behind him and that some people had questions about, as well as I think many other things, since at least from my personal conversations with James, there's a lot of interesting things. So with that, James, why don't you tell people a little bit about sort of your background, and then we'll go into some of the questions I have.
Wow. Well, what an open-ended question. I was born and raised in the Los Angeles, California area in the United States by really good American parents, mind you. I don't come from a, hard background. I come from a rather ordinary, happy background. Uh, I would say I was affected by religion. My parents took me to church and stuff. But by the time I discovered Ayn Rand as a teenager, I was already an atheist. I already identified as strange, and I even understood the paradox when I would say this in the 1970s. Because if you'd asked me what my philosophy of life was, I was very politically interested as a teenager, and I'd already lost religion all on my own. I would have described myself as an atheist for Ronald Reagan back in the 1970s before I found Ayn Rand, and I knew there was a tension there. I knew there was kind of a contradiction that I hadn't worked out in my own head. But when I described myself like that, someone said to me, "Well, you've got to read Ayn Rand. You really must. I mean, if that those are your political leanings, if that's what your position on religion is." But those were, you know, uh, conclusions of thought. They weren't, why I mean, I guess I could vaguely tell you why for certain, empirical reasons I believed in each of those positions, but I hadn't worked out a fully consistent philosophy at all. And discovering Ayn Rand was a revolution to me. It totally changed my life. It really helped me organize my life thereafter. Even before I discovered Ayn Rand, I knew I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to be an attorney, but boy, did it radically change the way I wanted to be an attorney, the nature of how I looked at my values in becoming an attorney. I had, through the course of my intellectual development, met a lot of intellectuals who had known Ayn Rand, and through them all, going through them all, the one that really made the biggest impression on me by far was Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And I had an opportunity to get to know him and study with him up close. I mean, I was part of a group that met at Dr. Leonard Peikoff's home before the publication of his masterwork, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. I was invited to come to his home on Saturday nights to discuss chapter by chapter OPAR, that book, before it was actually published. And so I got to have amazing conversations with Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And there came a point where he asked me, he said, "Jim, you seem to understand." He got me alone in his house after the talk, and he kind of cornered me. And he said, "Jim," this was way back, 35 years ago now, 1990 or something. He cornered me at the end of the OPAR seminars. We kept meeting at his home on Saturday nights because he just wanted to keep talking about stuff. Uh, but he cornered me. He said, "Jim, you seem to understand the philosophy. Why don't you become a philosophy professor? We can always use academics in the field of philosophy." And I said, "Yeah, I understand that. But, Ayn Rand had taught me to be selfish. And, Leonard, you're not going to see the full effect of your work. It's just not going to have philosophers are working for the future. The cutting edge ideas of one generation may become the common sense of the next generation, but I don't want to wait for the next generation. I need to see the feedback, the ka-ching in my own lifetime." And so when I was being a prosecutor and I'd do all the work, I'd get that guilty verdict at the end. Ka-ching, I put away that murderer. I became a prosecutor, and I was a prosecutor for over 17 years, prosecuting child molest, domestic violence, murder cases. I did some appellate work there. And so I explained to Leonard I was getting immediate feedback, and he just looked at me, and there was really little he could say because, from the standpoint of a philosophy that advocates long-term rational self-interest, he understood what my own values were, my need, in effect, for the immediate feedback within my lifetime. Um, there came a point in my career at the DA's office after many years being there, and I loved that work. Oh, man, did I love that work. I would feel just excited, like I was on the side of truth, justice, and the American way every morning going to work. And nothing could be more motivating and nothing could be more rewarding than seeing justice delivered. But I had a long-term chronic health issue, and it just began to get worse and interfere with my ability to be a trial lawyer. And being the guy in court, I mean, I didn't want to be one of these paper pusher lawyers, doing paperwork. And I clerked inside a big law firm for a while, and that taught me I did what the kind of lawyer I did not want to be. But my health issue was interfering with my being a trial lawyer. I just couldn't do the same thing I could do. So I had to make massive career shift in my life several years ago. And that's really a very difficult thing. One thing Ayn Rand gave me was a sense of the validity of not only my purpose, but having purpose, the importance of having purpose. And I'd invested so much of myself in what I was and what I was doing that, when you have to make a major career shift in your life, it's a significant crisis. And I had to sort of shift. And it was at that point that I became more of an advocate. I was able to finish my book on Christianity. I was able to do other projects and become more, like people see me here on Ayn Rand Center UK, become more of an advocate for ideas. But again, it was objectivism that provided me the real tools in order to face a personal crisis in my life and to come out of it even better than I was before. That's the way I have of putting it. Objectivism, I was becoming an atheist. I guess I put a value on reason, but I didn't know the real value of reason. I didn't know how it worked, what it really was, and the absolute nature of it. All that Ayn Rand gave me. When it came to ethics, I guess I was motivated. I guess I was ambitious. There were things I wanted to do. But Ayn Rand was the one who told me the sanctity of my own personal ambition, to never not have purpose. And when it comes to ethics, I had been, of course, like so many Americans, infected by Christian altruism. It was just the way I was raised. And for that, only Ayn Rand could have helped me. And so she helped me develop an integrated way of looking at the world. And having that integrated way of working with, dealing with reality actually helped me navigate everything I did. The difficult moral questions that come up when you are working for government, the difficult questions that come up when you are trying to do justice in very serious matters, such as criminal cases, things like that. The pursuit of what was really in my own highest selfish values, and to not be ashamed of that, to be proud of that, and to be single-minded in my focus on that. All of that Ayn Rand gave me. I can't imagine. I can't imagine uh, what I would have been. There's that Beach Boys song from 60 years ago. God only knows. God only knows what I would be without Ayn Rand.
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot there that I want to go through, but I want to stick at the career for a bit longer because for me, me growing up and me learning objectivism pretty much happened around the same time when I was 16, 17. Sort of like even the idea of what I wanted to do with my life was developing at the same time as sort of me learning the philosophy. But I think it's because you said you wanted to be attorney even before discovering objectivism, and I think that's can you tell us a little bit more about that, of sort of like already knowing, and then you mentioned that with the discovery of objectivism, it sort of maybe put it into even better context. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Both why you always wanted to be, or at least why you wanted to be for a long time, and then how that developed with objectivism.
I guess I didn't always want to be. If you'd asked me if I was when I was a
Yeah.
small child, I was so into religion. My parents were not terribly religious people, but they took me to church. And I guess I kind of freaked my parents out because as a small child, I was into it. I was Mr. Bible man. I was sitting in the front pew at church on Sundays, and looking up, wow, these are the answers. I was always, let me put it that way, interested in the power of ideas. And if these were the important ideas, as my parents were sort of guiding me to, that is what I was going to take seriously. And I guess it was off-putting to my parents. I can still remember the hushed conversations. Well, he'll grow out of it. He won't be that religious at some point. But it happened to me overnight, just overnight. Boom! I lost my religion, and so my number two goal was now no longer to pursue religion. Because if you'd asked me maybe at the age of 9 or something, 10, I would have told you I want to be a theologian, a teacher of religion, or a clergyman or something. When that changed, sort of my number two pick was to be Perry Mason. God, I loved those old Perry Mason shows. Even as a kid, even as a relatively small kid, I loved Perry Mason, not realizing Ayn Rand also loved Perry Mason. But I loved Perry Mason, and I wanted to be that guy doing justice. And it was based on experiences I'd had as a kid. I wasn't particularly bullied, but I saw kids who were bullied. And there were times when I would intervene. I just didn't like injustice. I had many times, there were occasions when teachers would treat me unjustly, not because I'd done something wrong, but oftentimes because I'd done something right. And those instances of injustice dragging me down to the norm, as teachers would sometimes insist on doing, that sense of injustice really motivated me from those experiences. That's why I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to do justice, see justice, correct injustice where I found it. That's what, in large part, inspired my first book, The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. I saw that the early biographies of Ayn Rand were just ridiculously unfair, contradictory, dishonest, coming from biased witnesses. And so I had to give that analysis. I had to do justice to Ayn Rand, who'd given me so much. So when I read The Fountainhead, I sort of knew that being a lawyer and being a Howard Roark architect aren't exactly the same thing. And in fact, there'd be new and different kind of demands, maybe worse than the world of architecture that Howard Roark was dealing with. But I'll tell you, when I read The Fountainhead, I knew right away that I wasn't Howard Roark. I knew that. But I also felt within me, this is the best part of me. If I could live up to this, I wanted to be Howard Roark so badly, to be able to be like Howard Roark so badly. So what Ayn Rand gave me was an inspiration. What Ayn Rand gave me was motivation. I was like the boy on the bicycle, and seeing what it could be when you devote yourself to your real values, to your long-term values, and never let anything interfere with your personal ambition in achieving those things. Boy, was that powerfully inspirational for me. It fired me. It fired me up intellectually. It fired me up personally to achieve my goals. And It was a revolutionary impact on me. That's all I can say. And it has been my guiding star and my lodestone ever since, making me good at what I do, making me conscientious at what I do in a way that I never even imagined it could possibly do. I was a good person. I was an honest person. I was going to do the best I could. But Moran helped me organize my values in such a way that I was even better at achieving my goals in life. And I found myself to be a happier, more confident person. My confidence level in reason went way through the roof. The all that unearned guilt from Christianity fell to the wayside so that I could pursue my own happiness, pleasure, goals, values. I can't imagine, for example, how what it's going to sound altruistic, but I'm going to say something. I was better at bringing justice to my community because of the selfish philosophy Ayn Rand taught me. I was a better friend to my friends because of the selfishness that Ayn Rand taught me. I was a better husband to my wife. First of all, I knew what I was looking for in a romantic relationship. And I've been married now almost 29 years to the same wonderful, amazing lady. And, you know, having a successful relationship for that period of time requires a high degree of rationality, a clear view of what your hierarchy of values are. And it was that devotion to the truth and to reason that really has made my marriage so successful. But I would say that objectivism made me a better friend, a better husband, better at what I do. But more than that, because of all that, it made me a happier person.
So justice is one of Ayn Rand's cardinal virtues, and you said about how you didn't like to see injustice, and that sort of led you to your career. But then I guess I would have a question of why specifically sort of like a criminal lawyer, right? Or specifically, I'm trying to remember, not the defense attorney. What is the opposite? I forgot the name.
Prosecutor or
Prosecutor, yeah. Sort of why well, even then, sort of, I guess more broadly, sort of why a lawyer? Why not something like, for example, police? And then when it comes to specifically law, why prosecution? Why not defense attorney? Why not? And now we start going into bigger things like why not judge, or then why not run for like a district attorney?
mm, mm. Well, the last first. I don't have to tell objectivists how messed up our political system is and how our government has been corrupted by very, very bad ideas. And it is difficult enough working for government and trying to maintain your integrity. And boy, did I have a lot of lessons that I learned along the path there. Not from any major screw ups, but from realizing what the situation, the stark, sometimes injustice that I was faced with the law from which I was trying to achieve justice. Most of the time, and I mean most of the time, when criminals are charged, they're guilty. They're guilty. And a lot of the procedures that are out there that get defendants off are technicalities of law, aspects of law that I disagree with. Besides, I wanted to get the bad guy. I wanted to be the white hat. I didn't want to, and if you're a defense attorney, very frequently you have to, as I say, defend people who really did commit murders, rapes, child molests. And I just could not see myself motivating myself. And that was really what it fundamentally was, motivating myself to at least very frequently having to defend people I knew were guilty of very horrible crimes. And so, all other things being equal, even though there's a lot of bad laws out there and a lot of bad procedure in our law, I knew that being a prosecutor would be a much more comfortable fit. I said this when they were interviewing me. I was doing the interview process. Becoming a DA, you got to go through waves of, they do an FBI background check. They do the whole 9 yards on you. I would tell them, look, they asked me just exactly that question. Why not be a public defender? You're all idealistic in favor of justice, Jim, and you're all in favor of rights and the Bill of Rights and all that. Why don't you go be a defense attorney? I said, no, I just, as a matter of daily in and out, ordinary business around here, it's the bad guys I want to get. And I want the reward of the psychological feedback that I am protecting people, not from an altruistic goal. It's like Howard Rourke. That's the wonderful thing, because if I approached it altruistically, I can see the dark path I would have gone down, sacrificing myself so that law gets enforced, because this is the law that people want. No, I had a sense of what justice really involved because of Ayn Rand. I knew when the government had a bad law that ought not to be enforced. And so I steered myself away from areas like drug laws. I steered myself into areas like murder and rape, and even appellate work that would, when I had the more control over years, the more choice I had, the more I could get myself into doing just what I knew was justice. When it came to drugs, when they said, "Hey, how about a drug court? Non-incarceration alternatives for drug addicts," I raised my hand and I helped start the first drug court. And I worked with drug addicts for over a year in that capacity, but as a way of having a less harsh approach to dealing with drug addicts who are committing suicide on the installment plan, but these drug laws are only killing them and making the situation 100 times worse. And so, without the values that Ayn Rand, the value structure that Ayn Rand had provided me, I guess I would have been an altruist, slaving away for the good of my community, rather than a person achieving his own values, his own way, and achieving individual justice, because the community I lived in, where I lived with my wife, was a safer place, where we were now free. Everyone was free, including me and my wife, to pursue our own rational, selfish interests. I now saw myself as creating an environment in which people could pursue values. And that's really what the law does. The law itself is preventing a negative, creating a condition of freedom for people to pursue their own values. But I realized what a selfish value that was to me. And I was then able to make value assessments and develop a value hierarchy that, again, without objectivism, I could never have done. And so, yeah, I understood what justice was. Justice wasn't a matter, it's not, I didn't have a notion of forgiveness, an unearned forgiveness, mind you, that the law sort of, even the criminal law, sort of builds into it as the alternative for correct justice and the actual safety of individuals in my community. And so it really changed my perspective on what justice is and what I was doing and why I was doing it as a prosecutor. It helped me to navigate what was right and wrong with the law and what I wanted to zero in on and focus in on. And that enormously increases. I saw prosecutors around me losing motivation precisely because they didn't have that clear idea of what they were doing, what justice was. What justice was. Ayn Rand gave me that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to develop it a bit further, because some time ago I had this very interesting experience where somebody told me about sort of, I'm not sure if virtue is the right word, but the importance of the prison system as part of the justice system. And I'm wondering to what extent okay, this might be a long question, so if you can follow, because I'm thinking if somebody, let's say, gets into, beats up somebody or does something bad, not something bad as in you get life, but something you get like 5 years in prison or something like that. Well, if that person, gets 5 years in prison, but in that prison, because it's improperly managed or something, he gets beat up a lot or he gets, raped or something like that. Well, was justice like really achieved if he was supposed to get 5 years, but instead he gets this like much worse experience than that sort of like judge was thinking of. And I'm wondering, how does the whole system itself play a role in sort of your sort of psychology of achieving justice? Because I imagine if you were like a lawyer in Soviet Union, you probably wouldn't get the sense of justice no matter what kind of job you were trying to achieve. So I'm wondering, how much does it play a role, sort of like the whole system itself and sort of like your role in it and what you're trying to achieve? Because you did build upon it a little bit by, steering clear of going after the criminals you think that the law was unjust, like the drug enforcement, for example.
Well, crimes occur in prison, and protecting criminals from other criminals in prison is a part of criminal law enforcement. Sometimes we would prosecute cases. Now, there are specific challenges, obviously, for prosecuting in prison crimes, but we prosecute cops, we prosecute politicians, we prosecute crimes that occur in prison. That is, in fact, one of the interesting and appealing things to me about being a prosecutor, say, over being, you asked about whether I wanted to be a judge. That would involve me in doing things See, it was sort of the same analysis I had with working for the federal government. Most of what the federal government does in terms of law enforcement is, antitrust cases, immigration cases, tax cases, securities and exchange, insider trading laws. So much of what the federal government does is just wrong. I would have felt, I don't think there's certain jobs, I think, that are very challenging. And wow, I've spoken to people who are admirers of Ayn Rand who've done those sort of jobs, but boy, did they have a much worse psychological time of it than I did. I could go into court and say that cop was lying. I could go into court and prosecute injustices that were happening in state prisons. I could uh, do the right thing. Let me put it this way, and I worked for a particularly good office as well. I could work for an office in which the orders from on high, and I'm very blessed to have worked for a prosecution office that had this philosophy: do the right thing, do the right thing, no matter what. It's not a question of getting notches, for how many the numbers of your convictions. It's doing the right thing, making sure we've got the right guy. So I couldn't have become a federal lawyer. I don't think. I don't think I could have become a politician or a judge for the same reason that I don't think that let me put it this way, myself as an honest objectivist, I would have felt morally compromised and unable to do it. And that's a sad thing because we need objectivist judges. We need, I don't know if we need objectivists in these federal regulatory agencies, but we should get rid of those federal regulatory agencies right away. Those are first up, way before we phase out even Social Security or welfare. We should get rid of those stupid regulations. So I don't think I could have done that. And it's really sad because a better world would have more objectivist judges in it. But what scares them off is that they become agents of injustice because our law involves so much injustice. Our legal system is downright uh, corrupt, not from crooks, cutting corners, but from professionals just doing their jobs. And when corruption is at that level, it was difficult for me to even conceive of doing that. A lot of friends I had, not objectivists, but a lot of friends I had at prosecutors are now judges. Um, uh, I've got friends who are judges, and they are good people. Don't get me right. Don't get me wrong. But to do the right thing all the time, even they will complain. I can't do justice every time, and that's what motivated me. I needed to be able to do justice every time and look at myself in the mirror and know that I was doing justice every single time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And well, I guess then sort of the next step that I would just ask, what about, and I'm thinking of do you know Larry Saltzman from the Pacific Legal Foundation?
Yes.
Yeah, what about now, I don't know specifically how is that different, but what about things like that, basically
That would
either,
be
yeah,
the absolute thing that would tempt me to go back into law. Absolutely. Absolutely.
just to explain,
Because what they're doing is
yeah.
something even more important. They're trying to change law, at least the judicial law. So much of our law is not in statute books, but in cases where appellate courts define what that law is. And so much of American law depends upon our highest courts sort of giving the parameters. And groups like that are doing heroic work in terms of changing our the legal direction of our appellate cases. Back when I was making my initial decisions to become a prosecutor, a prominent objectivist, not Leonard Pico, but another prominent objectivist, asked me what I thought the prospects were for the Supreme Court and leading us in the right direction. I was very pessimistic, and I didn't think that we were heading in a particularly good direction. I think that I was wrong. I think that you can accomplish more. And organizations like the one you just mentioned have gotten me to realize that there is some hope in making things at least a little better. But that's all that they're really accomplishing. The major direction and the major principles of constitutional law that the United States Supreme Court, for example, have been committed to for the last, what, 80 years, have been wrongheaded in so many fundamental ways that I was particularly pessimistic about the direction of appellate law in the United States. Back in the 20th century, I would have described myself as extremely pessimistic, and I still fear that we're heading in a bad direction in certain ways. But all other things being equal, I think the Supreme Court has gotten, in some ways, a little better, in some ways, worse over the last couple of decades. But achieving things as much as we can in that department is heroic work. And I want to take my hat off to people like that. That's the other area of law that I think now, as opposed to, say, 40 years ago, I would absolutely encourage young lawyers, idealistic young lawyers, into getting involved in such an organization that would fight for liberty, individual rights, because for God's sake, that can at least buy us time. If you think our culture and our legal system is heading to the brink, at least they can buy us time and get us better, if not perfect, outcomes from our appellate courts.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much. A super chat from Jonathan, thank you so much. And a super chat from Robert, thank you so much. Robert says James Valiant has the spark. I think that will be the catchphrase of this show. And also, Bonnie in the chat is asking, does James ever sleep? He leads the Peak of Study group on the ARCUK website every Sunday, which is what we did today. And it's also available for website members and YouTube members. He does Constitution series for the channel, which is for the Inner Circle members on YouTube, as well as Reardon Metal and Above members on the website. So people can check out that. And he appears on podcasts and more. And she says, fortunately, as in thanking you for it. How do you... I guess that is also a good question. How do you find time to focus on things?
Uh, I enjoy the work. Um, that's the key. It really is. And to enjoy the work, enjoy the doing. You know, that's another lesson that Ayn Rand taught me. Howard Rourke really enjoyed the doing. You know, words that were sacred to me from the Fountainhead. You know, I read that amazing dialogue between Howard Rourke and Peter Keating when they're talking about, you know, their deal to design Cortlandt homes. And Peter asks Howard Rourke, you know, why are you doing this? You know, I'll get all the fame, I'll get the gratitude, I'll get all the money. And Howard Rourke responds, yes, you'll get everything that one man can give another, but I will get what no man can give another. I will have built Cortlandt. And in my own mind, those were like sacred words. Those were like sacred words. So you asked me, you know, whether I get the credit or not is irrelevant. I love the doing. Whether I get paid or not is really a secondary thing to me. I love the doing. Sure, of course, I want positive feedback. Of course, I want remuneration for what I do. But the point, though, is that you've got to love the doing, as Howard explained to Peter Keating. That's what it's really all about. You won't be good at what you do. You won't be motivated at what you do unless you love the doing, unless it really is something you enjoy doing. So where do I get the energy and the time? From loving what I do. Now, that does not take away from the fact that I have time management issues. I still have time. If I were to name to you what is my major issue that I'm still working on, and you know, you never get so wise and so experienced that you don't have new issues that are always foremost on your mind. And in my own mind, I've got to be better because I want to appear on podcasts about history. I want to appear on podcasts about the origins of religion. I want to appear on objectivist podcasts where I can advocate for my philosophy. And I want to write books. I'm trying to write books in the meantime, and do other projects. My God, when I have a friend in need, for example, I want to devote my sense of justice will very often motivate me to get off my tail and do what I can for a friend in need. And in that respect, what I need is, again, something Ayn Rand taught me: having a hierarchy of values, knowing what is most important to you in any given context is something that only reason can provide, and a sense of values, a standard of value to provide a way of organizing your values and your purpose in life. So, where do I find the time? Well, I only have the time that everyone else has. I have 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, just like everyone else. If you see these super productive people, people who are even more productive than I am, what you're looking at are people who are rational, people who are allocating their time correctly, have a clear sense of their purpose, and some sense of hierarchy in their values, and are motivated. They love what they do. And that's the key. Selfishness really is the key to being productive.
Yeah, there are days every now and then where I get that sort of like hyper focus status, and you do in one day more than normally in a week. So
Right, right. They once said of the great economist Ludwig von Mises, he could do in a few hours what it took other people weeks to accomplish. Uh, sure, he was a brilliant person, and I think there's obviously ability. There may be aspects of ability that kick in here, but I also think part of it was the clarity of his values and his love of what he did. When you're clear about and explicit, and that takes thinking through, ladies and gentlemen. You can't bypass reason here. There's some people who just go by their emotions and think that's going to suffice. No, no, it isn't. You have to think through what your hierarchy of values are. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it, what your long-term goals are, your stretch goals, what your intermediate goals are, the realistic goals that you can get in the meantime as you're pursuing this long-term goal. And when you're my second book, it was a project that took me more than 30 years to finally complete. And of course, I was doing all kinds of other things in the process of it. But to achieve a long term goal, that's what you have to do. If you're really going for a long term value that you're trying to achieve, you've got to be very clear and explicit and rational and systematic in how you're going about it, going to get that value. But you also have to value yourself. You have to have confidence in your own capacity to reason and do that. You have to have consistency. You have to have integrity. Ayn Rand taught me the essentials, how those were essential in achieving a long-term goal. Um, I don't know how else to put it, but again, it's do what you love, but do it rationally. Think it through. Be long term. Know what you're doing when you're doing it. Um, those are the people that accomplish the most, I think, in life. Um, Super energetic people, yeah, but where does that energy come from? Successful people, where does that success come from? It comes from keeping their eye on the hierarchy of values, thinking through what the hierarchy of values are and the intermediate goals that are going to get them to that stretch goal, and loving what they're doing.
yeah, there is a bromide in my native language, and I'm not sure how well it translates, which is something like, you know, do what you love and you won't have to work a day in your life. And, that's sort of like a bromide that people say. But, when you philosophically, like, that's absolutely right. You should simply do, and that involves even when you read The Fountainhead. Rourke did, slight spoiler, the query work in the same way as he did his architecture because he understood it was clear. And once you have a purpose in life, it's clear like, okay, I want to do this. In order to do that, I need to do that, I need to do that, I need to do that. And once you have that, everything becomes easy. It's only when you don't have a purpose, when things are muddied, where like, well, I don't enjoy my work. Well, then leave or do it for something else, or like I cannot tell you to enjoy your work. I can only tell you, well, pick a purpose, pick a goal in your life, and go for that. Without having that, yeah, there is no meaning to anything. You are sort of just going and trying to, get to the end of the day because there is no sort of higher goal or there is no goal you are trying to achieve.
I've worked in factories, I've worked in bookstores, I've worked at jobs I knew were not my ultimate goal, but knowing the role that they played in my ultimate goal. Made the actually turned jobs that were not perfect for me, even jobs where there were unpleasant aspects, perhaps even for me, into real things that I was motivated to do and to do properly. In order to take advantage of the opportunities that those would give me, I had to get. I couldn't cut corners, even as a factory worker, as a bookstore clerk. I had to do that well. I knew I had to do that well so that the future opportunities that I was using those lesser jobs for to get to would get me to. But I didn't resent the law of cause and effect. I didn't resent the fact that I'm going to have to take jobs that are not my ultimate goal. Give me another analogy. Did I go out with did I go out with girls and women that were unpleasant dates and getting to know people as you're trying to find a romantic value in life? Not every date's going to be fun, and people often complain about being out there in the dating circuit and what a mixed bag and surprise it can be. It can, but did I resent the process? No. In fact, I tried to enjoy the process of getting to know people and socialize with people, try and get close and intimate with people. It didn't work out till I found the love of my life, but there's a perfect analogy here. You're going to go out on some dates that suck. You're going to meet some people that, they're nice, and you're going to probe the possibility with people who, wow, they really seem to have a value. But the process, as mixed as it is in the meantime, is a process you can't, a causal step you can't skip over if what you want is a successful long-term relationship. To find the right person actually requires purpose, thought, consistent action, not giving up when you have that date, you go out on that date that ultimately sucks. When finally you're saying, oh my gosh, it didn't work out with this person, this person, this person. I'm going to stick to it. And I'm still going to, nothing is going to stop me from trying to find that value or achieve that value. And I think there's a perfect analogy here in personal relationships to career. There's a causal process. And when it comes to finding your purpose in life, it's not automatic. I am lucky in one sense. I had a sense of who I was, and that gave me a sense of what I wanted to do early on. For a lot of people, it's finding that purpose in the first place. What is my goal? What is going to make me happy? What is the best fit for me? What would I really enjoy doing the most, and would provide the kind of rewards I'm looking for? That is something that, if you're not an objectivist, those people, almost, in my experience, rarely even think those things through. But even for objectivists, it can be difficult. Ayn Rand says I should have a purpose. I should be career dedicated, if I'm really going to be virtuous about it. Okay. Well, what is my purpose? What do I value? Where should I direct myself? And sometimes that takes experimenting with different career choices, experimenting with doing, I'll just volunteer or intern here to see where, if this is the kind of thing I want to do. Because as I said, for example, when I clerked at a big law firm, that told me a lot of things, even if they were mostly negative. I didn't want to be that kind of lawyer. I didn't want to be that kind of lawyer. But sometimes that's what we've got to do. We've got to check things out, at least dip our toe into it, give it a fair, or even more, give it a real fair chance before I know that's not what I want to do. And even if the answer is, at least I now know something I don't want to do, at least you're zeroing in on what your purpose is and what your purpose is going to end up being. All of that's important. Yeah.
Well, with that, I did want to go into your books, but I think we've had this nicely of talking about both justice and purpose. So I think it's better bundled those two things together and not go further. But of course, we might have you on again. The Sunday Spark is not ending, and it won't even end until when the conference happens, the Irreplaceable Spark Conference, which happens on 25th and 26th. I'll just quickly post a link in the chat. You can check it out on objectivism.co.uk. James will be there. He will be a coach, so you'll be able to get one-on-one session with him, but it's only for the I think the higher ticket holders. So you'll be able to also upgrade if you've already bought your tickets. But if you haven't, you can check it out on objectivism.co.uk. We also now have the hotel discounts available. So once you sign up, if you are already signed up, you should have received an email where you can get the discount to the hotel. And if you haven't signed up yet, when you do, you will get it. So it's in Southern California. Now I forgot Orange County. That's the place where it will be. So again, October 25th, 26th. Check it out on objectivism.co.uk. And with that, James, anything you'd like to finish this with?
Learning never ends. Self-improvement never ends. I'm constantly expanding my mind, constantly expanding my base of knowledge. You can see from the gray hair, I've been around this planet for a few decades already, but that never stops. And so I'm going to the Irreplaceable Spark Conference because I'm still learning and growing. I want to hear. I want to hear from successful business people. I want to hear from successful artists. I want to hear from successful people who've been successful in a variety of fields. I want to hear the talk from a successful actor like Mark Pellegrino. How do you do that in the field of art? I want to hear from Alex Epstein. My God, look at how he's really made a big impact on the energy policy in America. I want to hear from successful people. That's why I'm going to the Irreplaceable Spark Conference, because I'm still learning, I'm still growing. And if you're like me, then I suspect you'll find a great deal of value in attending this conference. As Rosie says, and as I say, this is going to be an objectivist conference like none other that has ever yet been. So please come and join us.
And yeah, I didn't finish my thought earlier. So what I meant is the Sunday Spark will continue even after the first Irreplaceable Spark conference. So with that, thank you, James, for joining me today. It was great. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the Reality Show, and of course next week with another episode of the Sunday Spark. Until then, bye bye.